Kelvrath Soren had spent his entire adult life watching other species. It was what his people did best. The Veloxi were born observers. Their compound eyes could track 40 different movements at once. Their minds could remember every detail of every conversation they had ever witnessed. The Galactic Concord valued this ability greatly, which was why so many Veloxi worked as diplomatic attachés across the known universe. For the past 3 years, Kelvrath had worked on Concord Station. It was the largest diplomatic hub in the galaxy. More than 400 different species sent representatives here to negotiate treaties, settle disputes, and conduct the endless business of interstellar politics. The station was a city floating in space, home to nearly 2 million beings from every corner of known space. Kelvrath loved his work. He loved watching the different species interact. He loved learning their customs, their fears, their hidden motivations. Every species had secrets, and Kelvrath had made it his personal mission to understand as many of them as possible. But there was one species that confused him more than any other: the humans. Humanity had joined the galactic community nearly 200 years ago. They were a young species by galactic standards. Their homeworld was a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. By all accounts, they should have been insignificant. They were physically unimpressive. They lacked natural weapons like claws or venom. They could not see in the dark like the Crixtal. They could not breathe underwater like the Delofi. They could not regenerate lost limbs like the Vorn. And yet, somehow, humanity had become one of the most respected species in the Galactic Concord. Their ambassadors spoke with quiet confidence. Their trade delegations negotiated favorable deals. Their colony worlds prospered. Other species treated them with a strange mixture of friendliness and caution, as if the humans were beloved pets who might suddenly bite. Kelvrath did not understand it. He had been trying to understand it for 3 years. Today, he stood in the grand observation gallery above the main diplomatic hall. Below him, representatives from dozens of species mingled before the start of the afternoon session. He watched them all, but his eyes kept returning to the human delegation. Ambassador Chen Wei stood near the center of the hall, speaking with a group of Thessian merchants. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She smiled often and laughed easily. The Thessians seemed charmed by her, but Kelvrath was not watching the ambassador. He was watching her guards. Every diplomatic delegation brought guards to the station. It was expected. It was necessary. The galaxy was not always a peaceful place, and important beings needed protection. The Crixtal brought warriors in full battle armor, carrying plasma rifles powerful enough to punch through starship hulls. The Skarath brought their elite death soldiers, their scales reinforced with metal implants, their claws coated in neurotoxin. Even the peaceful Melodii brought guards armed with sonic weapons that could shatter bones from 50 meters away. The humans brought 2 guards, a tall woman with dark skin and close-cropped hair, a shorter man with broad shoulders and watchful eyes. They wore simple dress uniforms with no armor. They carried no visible weapons, no guns, no blades, no defensive technology of any kind. They stood behind Ambassador Chen with their hands clasped behind their backs, watching the crowd with calm, almost bored expressions. Kelvrath had been observing human delegations for 3 years. Every single one was the same. 2 or 3 guards, simple uniforms, no weapons. It made no sense. He had researched human military technology extensively. He knew they possessed weapons, powerful weapons. Their navy was small but respected. Their soldiers had fought in several conflicts alongside allied species and had performed admirably. They were not pacifists. They were not defenseless. So why did their diplomatic guards arrive unarmed? Kelvrath had heard many theories over the years. Some species believed it was a religious practice. Humans had many religions, and perhaps one of them forbade carrying weapons in places of peace. Others thought it was simple arrogance. The humans believed themselves so important that no one would dare attack them. A few suggested that humans simply lacked the technology to create weapons small enough to carry concealed. None of these explanations satisfied Kelvrath. He had watched too many human guards. He had seen the way they moved, the way they positioned themselves, the way their eyes tracked potential threats across crowded rooms. These were not naive civilians playing at security. These were trained professionals. Professionals who chose to work without tools. It was a puzzle, and Kelvrath hated unsolved puzzles. He left the observation gallery and made his way through the station's corridors. His destination was the Central Archives, a vast repository of records dating back thousands of years. If anyone had documented the truth about human diplomatic security, the answer would be there. The archives were quiet at this hour. Most researchers preferred to work in the morning, when the station's artificial lights simulated daylight for the majority of species. Kelvrath preferred the evening, fewer distractions, more time to think. He settled into a research pod and began his search. He started with standard diplomatic records, meeting transcripts, security reports, incident logs. He found thousands of documents mentioning human delegations, but nothing that explained their unusual security practices. He expanded his search. Historical records, first contact documents, early observations of human behavior. The results were interesting, but unhelpful. Humanity's first contact with alien life had been peaceful and uneventful. A Thessian exploration vessel had discovered them nearly 200 years ago. The humans had been surprised but welcoming. Trade agreements followed, cultural exchanges. Eventually, membership in the Galactic Concord. Nothing in the official record explained the mystery. Kelvrath leaned back in his chair and clicked his mandibles in frustration. He was missing something. There had to be a connection he was not seeing. He decided to approach the problem from a different angle. Instead of searching for explanations, he would search for incidents. Attacks on diplomatic delegations, security breaches, assassination attempts. The results were disturbing. In the past 200 years, there had been hundreds of attacks on diplomatic personnel across the galaxy. Assassinations, kidnappings, terrorist bombings. Every major species had lost diplomats to violence at some point. Even the powerful Krixtal had suffered casualties despite their formidable guards. But the humans had lost no one. Kelvrath read through the records carefully, certain he must be making a mistake. 200 years of galactic diplomacy. Thousands of human diplomats serving on hundreds of worlds and stations. Not a single successful attack. There had been attempts. He found records of those. A bombing on Theta Station that killed 14 beings from 6 species. The human delegation had been in the next room. All of them survived with minor injuries. An assassination attempt on the human ambassador to the Krixtal hegemony. The assassin was found dead before he could reach his target. Cause of death listed as unknown trauma. A hostage situation on a colony world where terrorists captured delegates from 8 species. The humans were released unharmed after 3 hours. The terrorists refused to explain why. The pattern was undeniable. Someone or something was protecting human diplomats with remarkable effectiveness. And yet there was no evidence of advanced security technology. No force fields, no automated defense systems, no hidden weapons, just unarmed guards in dress uniforms. Kelvrath felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. He had stumbled onto something that others had worked hard to keep hidden. He dug deeper into the archives, searching for classified documents. His security clearance was limited, but the Veloxi had certain privileges when it came to accessing records. Their role as neutral observers gave them access to files that other species could not see. Most of the classified documents were routine. Trade negotiations that species wanted to keep private, military assessments that were no longer relevant, personnel records protected by privacy laws. But one file caught his attention. It was heavily redacted. More than 90% of the text had been removed. The file was old, dating back nearly 180 years, to the early days of human membership in the Concord. It had been classified at the highest level by a joint committee representing the 12 founding species of the Galactic Concord. The title was simple: Terran Contingency Protocol. Do not engage. Kelvrath stared at the words for a long time. Terran was an old name for humans, derived from their word for their homeworld. Contingency protocol suggested a plan for responding to some kind of threat or emergency, but the final 3 words were what troubled him most. Do not engage. It was a warning. A warning issued by the highest authorities in the galaxy, directed at everyone who might encounter human diplomats. Do not engage. Do not attack them. Do not threaten them. Do not provoke them. Why? What would happen if someone did? Kelvrath tried to access the full document, but his clearance was insufficient. The file had been sealed by the Concord Security Council. Only beings with the highest possible clearance could read the unredacted version. He saved a copy of the redacted file to his personal records and logged out of the system. His mind was racing. He needed to talk to someone who knew more than he did. Someone who had been around long enough to remember the early days of human contact. He knew just the person. Archivist Vethnal was the oldest Veloxi on the station. She had served in the diplomatic corps for more than 300 years. She had personally witnessed first contact with the humans and had observed their integration into galactic society from the beginning. If anyone knew the truth, it would be her. Kelvrath found her in her private study, surrounded by holographic displays showing documents from a dozen different eras. She was ancient by Veloxi standards. Her carapace faded to a pale gray, her movements slow and careful, but her mind was still sharp. Her compound eyes tracked Kelvrath as he entered, reading his body language with practiced ease. "Young Soren," she said. Her voice was dry and quiet. "You have questions?" "I do, Elder Vethnal." Kelvrath settled into a chair across from her. "Questions about the humans." Something flickered in the old archivist's eyes, a reaction so brief that only another Veloxi would have noticed it. "Fear. What about them?" she asked carefully. "Their diplomatic guards carry no weapons. I have been researching this practice for some time, trying to understand the reason. Today I found a classified file in the archives. It was called the Terran Contingency Protocol. The text was redacted, but the title alone raises disturbing questions." Vethnal was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was even quieter than before. "Some questions, young one, are best left unasked. With respect, Elder, I disagree. The Veloxi are observers. We seek truth. We document reality so that others might learn from it. How can I fulfill my duty if I ignore mysteries simply because they are uncomfortable?" The old archivist made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "You sound like I did, 200 years ago. I asked the same questions. I found the same file. I pushed for answers. And what did you learn?" Vethnal turned away from him, staring at the holographic displays as if seeing something far beyond them. "I learned that there are truths too dangerous to share. I learned that some secrets exist not to deceive, but to protect. And I learned that the humans are not what they appear to be." "What are they then?" The elder did not answer for a long time. When she finally spoke, her words were slow and heavy. "They are survivors, Kelvrath. Survivors of something terrible. Something that nearly destroyed them. They came to the stars carrying scars that we cannot see and memories that we cannot imagine. They smile and trade and negotiate because they have chosen to be civilized. But underneath that choice is something else. Something that the founding species recognized immediately. Something that made them create that file you found. What is it? What are they hiding?" Vethnal finally turned back to face him. Her ancient eyes were filled with a sadness that Kelvrath had never seen before. "They are hiding themselves, young one. The humans you see in the diplomatic halls, the friendly merchants and the patient ambassadors, they are real, but they are not complete. They have buried a part of themselves so deep that most of them do not even know it exists anymore. A part that emerged long ago, on their homeworld, when they were fighting for survival against their own kind." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "The guards do not carry weapons because weapons would be an insult to what they truly are. When a human chooses to kill, they do not need tools. They need only the will to act and the acceptance of what comes after. I have seen the classified footage, Kelvrath. I have seen what human guards can do when their charges are threatened. It is not something I can describe. It is not something I wish to remember." Kelvrath felt his carapace tighten involuntarily. "Then the protocol is a warning. A warning not to provoke them." "Yes, but it is more than that." Vethnal's voice trembled slightly. "The protocol exists because the founders realized something that still terrifies me to this day. The humans know what they are capable of. They know the darkness inside themselves, and they have built safeguards to ensure that if that darkness ever escapes, if humanity is ever pushed beyond its limits, the consequences will be absolute." "What kind of safeguards?" The elder shook her head. "That, I cannot tell you. Not because I wish to keep secrets, but because I genuinely do not know. The full truth was hidden even from the Veloxi. But I know this much. Every major power in the galaxy knows that attacking human civilians would be catastrophic, not just for the attacker. For everyone." She reached out and gripped Kelvrath's arm with surprising strength. "Stop your research, young one. Forget the file you found. Live your life in peace, and let the humans continue their quiet masquerade. They are trying to be better than their nature. They are trying to build a future where they never have to become what they once were. Do not take that hope from them, and do not provoke the alternative. Kelvrath left the elder's study with more questions than he had arrived with. He should have followed her advice. He should have abandoned his research and returned to his normal duties. But he was Veloxi. Observation was not just his job, it was his nature. He could no more ignore an unsolved mystery than he could stop breathing. He returned to his quarters and opened his personal terminal. The redacted file sat in his records, its title glowing on the screen, Terran Contingency Protocol. Do not engage. There had to be more information somewhere. Classified records that even the Veloxi could not normally access. He began to search for alternative sources. Black market data brokers, retired intelligence officers, anyone who might have pieces of the puzzle. He did not know it yet. But his search would take him to places he never imagined. He would learn truths that would change his understanding of the galaxy forever, and he would witness events that would bring humanity's secret to the very edge of revelation. The humans smiled and shook hands and conducted their business with unfailing politeness, and across the galaxy, ancient weapons waited in the dark between stars, patient and ready, tied to a promise that humanity prayed it would never have to keep. Kelvrath saved his search parameters and began to work. The mystery was too important to ignore. Whatever the truth was, he would find it. 6 months had passed since Kelvrath's conversation with Elder Vethnal. 6 months of careful research, quiet inquiries, and growing unease. He had learned more about humanity during that time than most aliens learned in a lifetime. He had studied their history, their culture, their biology. He had read thousands of documents and watched countless hours of footage. And still, the central mystery remained unsolved. The Terran Contingency Protocol was a ghost in the archives. Everyone who might know the truth either refused to talk or genuinely did not know the details. Kelvrath had found fragments and hints, whispered references and terrified silences. But nothing concrete, until the summit on Keth Prime. Keth Prime was a neutral world in unclaimed space, chosen specifically because it belonged to no one. The Galactic Concord had organized a major summit to address growing tensions between the Scarith Dominion and several neighboring powers. The Scarith were an aggressive reptilian species known for their military strength and their willingness to use it. They had been expanding their territory for decades, absorbing smaller species and crushing resistance with brutal efficiency. The summit was meant to negotiate boundaries and prevent a larger war. Representatives from more than 30 species attended, including humanity. Kelvrath had been assigned to the summit as part of the Veloxi observation team. His job was to document the proceedings and report on the diplomatic maneuvering of the various delegations. It was important work, but Kelvrath found himself distracted. The human delegation was larger than usual. Ambassador Chen Wei had brought a full team of advisors, translators, and support staff, and she had brought 4 guards instead of the usual 2. Kelvrath recognized 2 of them from Concord Station. Commander Sarah Okonkwo was a tall woman with dark skin and eyes that seemed to see everything. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, always aware of her surroundings, always positioned to respond to any threat. Sergeant David Reyes was shorter and broader, built like a wall of muscle, but his eyes held the same quiet watchfulness as his commander. The other 2 guards were new, a young man named Torres and a woman named Yamamoto. They were clearly less experienced than Okonkwo and Reyes, but they carried themselves with the same calm confidence. None of them carried weapons. Kelvrath watched them throughout the first 2 days of the summit. He watched them stand behind Ambassador Chen during the opening ceremonies. He watched them scan crowds at diplomatic receptions. He watched them coordinate silently with glances and subtle hand signals. They were professionals, clearly well-trained and highly competent, and completely unarmed. On the 3rd day of the summit, everything changed. The evening reception was held in the Grand Hall of the Keth Prime Conference Center. It was a massive space with high ceilings and walls made of transparent crystal that offered views of the planet's 3 moons. Hundreds of delegates mingled beneath floating light fixtures, drinking and eating and conducting the informal negotiations that were often more important than the official sessions. Kelvrath positioned himself near the edge of the crowd, where he could observe without being noticed. His compound eyes tracked multiple conversations simultaneously. The Thessian trade minister was talking to the Melodii cultural attaché. The Crixtal military commander was exchanging thinly veiled threats with a Scarith general. Ambassador Chen was speaking with a group of neutral observers, her guards arranged in their usual formation around her. Kelvrath noticed the Scarith first, 3 of them, moving through the crowd with purpose. They were not part of the official Scareth delegation. Their scales were darker, marked with the ritual scars of the Dominion's elite warrior caste. They wore formal robes that concealed their bodies, but Kelvrath could see the subtle bulges of hidden weapons. They were heading toward the human delegation. Kelvrath felt his hearts begin to race. He looked around for security personnel, but the conference center's guards were scattered throughout the room, unaware of the approaching threat. He could call for help, but by the time anyone responded, it might be too late. He turned back to watch, his observation instincts overriding his fear. The Scareth moved closer. 20 meters from the humans. 15. 10. Ambassador Chen was laughing at something one of her companions had said. She had no idea what was coming. 5 meters. The lead Scareth reached into his robes. What happened next would be analyzed, debated, and studied for decades. The conference center had excellent security footage, and copies would eventually spread across the entire galaxy. Kelvrath watched it with his own eyes, and even his perfect memory would struggle to fully capture what he witnessed. Commander Okonkwo moved. That was the only way to describe it. One moment she was standing calmly behind the ambassador. The next moment she was between Chen and the Scareth, her body flowing through space like water through a pipe. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation, no apparent effort. The lead Scareth had pulled a plasma pistol from his robes. His finger was moving toward the trigger. He never completed the motion. Okonkwo's hand closed around his wrist and twisted. The crack of breaking bones echoed through the suddenly silent hall. The pistol fell from nerveless fingers. Before it hit the ground, Okonkwo had driven her other hand into the Scareth's throat. Not a punch. Something worse. Her fingers had formed into a rigid point, and they pierced the scales that were supposed to be as strong as metal armor. The Scareth made a wet, gurgling sound and collapsed. The second attacker had drawn a vibroblade, a weapon that could cut through starship hulls. He swung it at Okonkwo's back, while she was engaged with his companion. Sergeant Reyes intercepted him. Kelvrath had thought Okonkwo was fast. Reyes was faster. He caught the Scareth's sword arm in both hands and did something that Kelvrath's brain refused to fully process. There was a series of rapid movements, several horrible popping sounds, and then the Scareth was falling with his arm bent in 3 directions that arms were not supposed to bend. Reyes did not let him fall. He grabbed the Scareth's head in both hands and twisted. The crack of the breaking neck was the loudest sound in the hall. The third Scareth had hesitated for perhaps half a second, watching his companions fall. That hesitation cost him everything. Torres and Yamamoto moved simultaneously. They were not as polished as their senior officers, but they were still terrifyingly effective. Torres tackled the Scareth at the waist while Yamamoto targeted his weapon hand. Within 2 seconds, the third attacker was on the ground, his arm broken, his weapon gone, his face pressed against the crystal floor by Yamamoto's knee. They kept him alive. Kelvrath would later learn that this was deliberate. They needed one survivor for interrogation. The entire attack and response had taken less than 5 seconds. The Grand Hall was silent. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of species stood frozen, staring at the scene before them. 2 dead Scareth, 1 captured, 4 human guards standing among them, barely breathing hard. Their dress uniforms not even wrinkled. Not a single weapon had been drawn. Because the humans had not brought any weapons to draw, Ambassador Chen Wei straightened her jacket and turned to face the room. Her expression was calm, almost serene. If she was frightened or angry, she showed no sign of it. Her eyes found the Scareth delegation across the hall. General Vraxul, the senior Scareth representative, stood at the front of his group, his scales pale with what Kelvrath recognized as shock. Ambassador Chen spoke 5 words into the silence. "We accept your formal apology." It was not a request. It was not a suggestion. It was a statement of fact, delivered with absolute confidence. General Vraxul did something that Kelvrath had never seen a Scareth do. He bowed his head. "The Scareth Dominion apologizes for this unprovoked attack," he said. His voice was strained, almost desperate. "These individuals acted without authorization. They will be disavowed. Reparations will be paid. We deeply regret this incident." Chen nodded once, as if she had expected nothing less. "Accepted. We will discuss the details tomorrow." She turned and walked out of the Grand Hall, her guards forming up around her. They moved through the crowd like a blade through water, and delegates from every species stepped aside to let them pass. No one tried to stop them. No one even spoke. After they were gone, the hall erupted into chaos. Security personnel rushed in. Medical teams attempted to help the injured Skarath, though there was nothing to be done for the two dead ones. Diplomats shouted questions at each other, trying to understand what had just happened. Kelvrath stood motionless, his mind racing. He had seen it. He had witnessed human guards in action, responding to a genuine threat. And now he understood why they did not carry weapons. They did not need them. The Skarath were one of the most physically powerful species in the galaxy. Their scales were natural armor. Their claws could tear through metal. Their soldiers trained from birth to be killing machines. 3 of their elite warriors had attacked the human delegation with advanced weapons. They had lasted less than 5 seconds. Kelvrath thought about what Elder Vethnal had told him months ago. The humans you see in the diplomatic halls are real, but they are not complete. They have buried a part of themselves. He had just seen that buried part emerge, but there was something else. Something that bothered him more than the display of violence. He kept returning to the moment after the attack. General Vraxul's immediate apology. The fear in his voice. The way he had capitulated without argument or resistance. The Skarath did not apologize. Not ever. Not for anything. Their culture viewed apology as weakness. They would rather start a war than admit fault. But Vraxul had apologized instantly, without hesitation, without being asked twice. Why? Kelvrath slipped away from the chaos in the Grand Hall and made his way to a quiet observation room. He needed to think. He needed to process what he had seen and what it meant. The attack had been planned. The Skarath assassins were elite warriors, not random terrorists. They had targeted the human ambassador specifically. This was a deliberate provocation, probably ordered by someone high in the Dominion's command structure, and it had failed catastrophically. But that was not the truly strange part. Assassination attempts failed all the time. Targets escaped, guards intervened. Sometimes the attackers were killed. It was unfortunate but not unprecedented. What was unprecedented was the Skarath response. Vraxul had not just apologized. He had practically begged for forgiveness. A Skarath general, a being who had personally executed rivals and crushed rebellions, had lowered his head and pleaded for the humans to accept his apology. Kelvrath's research had taught him many things about the Skarath. They were proud. They were aggressive. They were utterly ruthless. They respected strength and despised weakness. They had looked at 4 unarmed humans standing over the bodies of their warriors, and they had been terrified, not impressed, not angry. Terrified. They knew something. Something that Kelvrath did not. Something that made a military superpower beg for forgiveness from a species that most of the galaxy considered physically unremarkable. He accessed his personal terminal and began reviewing his research files. The redacted document. The Terran contingency protocol. Do not engage. The pieces were starting to fit together. The humans were not protected by their guards. They were protected by something else. Something that every major power in the galaxy knew about. Something that made attacking human civilians unthinkable. The guards were not there to fight. They were there to survive an attack long enough for the attackers to realize their mistake. They were there to give their enemies a chance to apologize before things escalated. Before what escalated, Kelvrath needed answers. He needed to find someone who knew the full truth. The next morning, he requested a meeting with the Concord's senior intelligence liaison. It took 3 days of bureaucratic maneuvering, but eventually he found himself in a secure room with a being he had never expected to meet. Director Soma Vasquez was the human representative to the Concord's Intelligence Committee. She was an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that reminded Kelvrath uncomfortably of Commander Okonkwo. She listened to his questions without expression. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "You've done impressive research, Attaché Soren," she finally said. "Most observers never get this far. Most don't want to." "I need to understand," Kelvrath said. "I saw what happened in that hall. I saw how the Skarath reacted. There is something more going on here. Something that everyone knows but no one will explain." Vasquez nodded slowly. "You're right. There is. And I'm going to tell you something that very few non-humans know. I'm going to tell you because you're Veloxi, and because your people have a reputation for keeping secrets when it matters." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "The guards don't carry weapons because weapons would be redundant. What you saw in that hall was not a display of human strength. It was restraint. Those guards could have done far worse, but they chose not to. Because they understand what happens when humans stop holding back. What happens? Vasquez's eyes were dark and sad. We nearly destroyed ourselves once. Long before we reached the stars, we fought a war against each other that killed half our species. When it was over, the survivors looked at what they had done and made a choice. We would be better. We would control ourselves. We would never let that darkness escape again. She paused. But we also built insurance. In case we ever faced extinction again. In case some other species tried to do to us what we had done to ourselves. We created a system. A fail-safe. Something that would activate automatically if human casualties from hostile alien action exceeded a certain threshold. What kind of system? Vasquez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. A system that would end everything. Every species. Every world. Every star. If humanity dies, the galaxy dies with us. That's the Terran contingency protocol. Attaché Sorin. That's why the Skarath apologized. Not because they were afraid of 4 guards. Because they were afraid of triggering the end of everything. Kelvrath felt his entire body go cold. You built a weapon that could destroy the galaxy? We built a guarantee, Vasquez corrected. A promise that attacking humanity would be the last thing anyone ever did. Not because we're vengeful. Not because we're evil. Because we were terrified. We had just watched ourselves almost go extinct. We had just discovered we weren't alone in the universe. We didn't know if you would be friends or monsters. So we made sure that if you were monsters, we could take you with us. And the major powers know this? Everyone who matters knows. The Skarath know. The Crixtal know. The Concord's founding species were informed during first contact. That's why the protocol exists. That's why no one attacks human civilians. Ever. Kelvrath sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he had just learned. Humanity had arrived in the galaxy, smiling and friendly, carrying no weapons. And the entire time, they had been holding a dead man's switch that could kill everyone. Why are you telling me this? He finally asked. Vasquez sighed. Because you were going to keep digging. Because you're Veloxy, and you can't help yourself. And because I think you deserve to know the truth. You watched those guards save my ambassador's life. You watched them kill to protect her. The least I can do is explain why they didn't need weapons to do it. She stood and walked to the door. Go home. Attaché Soren. Forget what you've learned if you can. And pray that no one ever tests the limits of human restraint. She left him alone in the secure room, his mind full of terrible knowledge. The humans smiled and negotiated and conducted their business with perfect politeness. And behind that smile was a promise of absolute destruction. Kelvrath finally understood why everyone was so afraid. 2 years had passed since the incident on Keth Prime. Kelvrath had been promoted twice and now held the title of Senior Diplomatic Observer. It was an important position, one that gave him access to high-level negotiations and classified briefings. He had earned the respect of his peers and the trust of his superiors, but he had not forgotten what Director Vasquez had told him. A system that would end everything. Every species, every world, every star. The words haunted him. He had tried to verify the information through official channels, but had found nothing. The Terran contingency protocol remained classified at the highest levels. Even his new security clearance was not enough to access the full file, so he had begun searching for unofficial sources. The galactic intelligence community was a complex web of agencies, informants, and retired operatives. Most of them wanted nothing to do with questions about humanity's secrets, but eventually, through careful cultivation of contacts and quiet exchanges of favors, Kelvrath found a name: Marcus Webb. Webb had been a senior officer in humanity's intelligence service for more than 40 years. He had served during the early days of human expansion into the galaxy, when first contact was still a recent memory and the rules of interstellar diplomacy were still being written. According to Kelvrath's sources, Webb had been directly involved in the creation of the Terran Contingency Protocol. He had retired 15 years ago to a small colony world on the edge of human space, a place called New Montana, known for its vast plains and empty skies. Webb lived alone in a small house far from the main settlements, apparently content to spend his remaining years in quiet isolation. Kelvrath traveled to New Montana without telling anyone his purpose. He rented a ground transport and drove for 3 hours across the empty grasslands until he reached a small house sitting alone beneath the enormous sky. Marcus Webb was waiting on his porch. He was an old man by human standards, his hair white and his face lined with age, but his eyes were sharp and clear, and he watched Kelvrath's approach with the careful attention of someone who had spent a lifetime assessing threats. Veloxy Diplomatic Service, Webb said as Kelvrath climbed out of the transport. Probably an observer, based on your age and bearing. You've come a long way to find me. You knew I was coming? I have friends who still keep track of things. They told me a Veloxy had been asking questions about the old days. Questions about the protocol. Webb gestured to a chair beside his own. Sit. I assume you have many questions. Kelvrath settled into the chair. It was sized for humans, slightly uncomfortable for his body, but he did not complain. I have learned some things, he said carefully. Director Vasquez told me about the system. The failsafe. But she did not explain the details. Soma always was careful with information. Webb smiled faintly. What do you want to know? Everything. I want to understand why humanity built such a thing. I want to understand what you are really afraid of. Webb was silent for a long moment, staring out at the endless plains. The wind moved through the tall grass like waves on an ocean. You want to understand humanity, he finally said. That's a bigger request than you realize. We barely understand ourselves. He turned to face Kelvrath directly. Let me tell you a story. Not the official history that you've read in archives. The real story. The one we don't like to talk about. Kelvrath settled deeper into his chair. His compound eyes focused entirely on the old human. Long before we reached the stars, Webb began. We were alone on our world. Earth, a beautiful planet, but a harsh one. We evolved there, in competition with thousands of other species. Predators with claws and fangs, prey animals that could outrun us, competitors for every resource we needed to survive. We were not the strongest species on Earth. We were not the fastest. We could not fly or swim for great distances. We had no natural weapons except our hands and our teeth. By every measure, we should have been prey for larger, more powerful animals. But we survived. And eventually, we became the dominant species on our planet. Do you know how? Kelvrath considered the question. Your intelligence. Your tool use. Your ability to cooperate in large groups. Yes, all of those things. But there was something else. Something that made us different from every other species on Earth. Webb's voice grew quieter. We never stopped. When we chased prey, we did not sprint and give up if we failed. We walked. For hours. For days. We tracked our prey across vast distances until it collapsed from exhaustion. Other predators were faster, but they tired quickly. We never tired. We just kept coming. Persistence predation, Kelvrath said. I have read about this. It's more than a hunting technique. It's who we are. When a human decides to accomplish something, they do not stop until they succeed or die. We are patient. We are relentless, and we remember everything. Webb stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the horizon. That trait served us well for millions of years. We conquered our planet. We built civilizations. We created art and science and philosophy. But that same trait had a darker side. When humans fight each other, we do not stop. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Our history is filled with wars that lasted for generations. Conflicts that destroyed entire civilizations. Grudges that were passed down from parent to child for centuries. He turned back to face Kelvrath. And then, about 300 years before we met you, we finally developed weapons that could kill everyone. Kelvrath felt a chill run through his body. Nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons. We created devices that could end cities in seconds. Plagues that could wipe out populations. Poisons that could make entire regions uninhabitable for generations. And then we used them. Webb's face was haunted. We had a war. Not a war between nations or empires. A war between ideologies, between ways of seeing the world. It started small, with proxy conflicts and economic competition, but it grew. It always grew with us. The final war lasted 3 years. When it was over, half of humanity was dead. Our cities were ruins. Our ecosystems were collapsing. We had poisoned our own world so badly that we nearly went extinct. The survivors crawled out of the rubble and looked at what they had done. They saw the bodies of billions. They saw the devastation that would take centuries to repair. And they made a choice. Never again. Webb returned to his chair, his movements slow and heavy. We rebuilt. It took generations, but we rebuilt everything. Our cities, our governments, our civilization, and we changed ourselves. We created new social structures designed to prevent large-scale conflict. We developed psychological techniques to manage our more destructive impulses. We buried the darkness that had nearly destroyed us, but we did not forget what we were capable of. When we finally reached the stars and discovered that we were not alone, we were not naive. We knew what intelligent species could do to each other. We had done it ourselves. We had looked into the abyss and seen our own reflection. So we built the protocol. Kelvrath leaned forward. Tell me about it. Tell me what it actually is. Webb was silent for a long moment. During first contact with the Thessians, our leaders realized that we were entering a galaxy full of species that might be hostile. Species with technologies we could not match. Species that might see us as threats to be eliminated or resources to be exploited. We could not compete with them militarily. Not yet. Our fleet was small. Our weapons were primitive by galactic standards. If a major power decided to wipe us out, we would have been helpless to stop them. So we built something else. Something hidden. Something that would make destroying humanity the worst decision any species could ever make. Webb's voice grew even quieter. We seeded weapons throughout the galaxy. Tiny devices, hidden in the quantum foam of subspace, woven into the hyperspace lanes that every species uses for faster-than-light travel. Planet crackers that could shatter worlds. Star killers that could make suns go nova. Self-replicating machines that could consume entire systems. All of it connected to a network of sensors monitoring human vital signs across the galaxy. All of it tied to a dead man's switch. Kelvrath's breath caught in his throat. If human casualties exceed a threshold, the system activates automatically. No human decision required. No negotiation possible. Every weapon fires. Every device triggers. Every star in the galaxy goes dark. Webb looked directly into Kelvrath's compound eyes. We built the end of everything and scattered it across the universe. And then we told the major powers what we had done. Not as a threat, as a fact, as a simple statement of the new reality. If humanity dies, everyone dies. That's why no one attacks human civilians. That's why the Scarith apologized. That's why our guards don't carry weapons, because the weapons would be meaningless compared to what happens if those guards fail. Kelvrath struggled to process what he was hearing. The scale of it was almost impossible to comprehend. An entire galaxy held hostage by a species that most others considered physically unremarkable. How could you do such a thing? He finally asked. How could you build something so terrible? Webb's laugh was bitter and sad. Because we had just finished killing half of ourselves, and we were terrified of doing it again. Because we looked at the stars and saw a universe full of unknowns. Because we knew what we were capable of, and we assumed others might be capable of the same things. We built the protocol because we were afraid. Not of you. Of ourselves. We were afraid that if another species pushed us hard enough, we would become what we had been during the war. We were afraid that we would start killing and never stop. The protocol was supposed to prevent that. It was supposed to ensure that we would never face extinction again. That we would never be pushed into that corner where the darkness takes over. We thought of it as insurance. A guarantee that we would be left alone to build the peaceful civilization we were trying to create. We never intended to use it, we just needed to know it was there. Webb stood again and walked into his house. He returned a moment later with a bottle and 2 glasses. He poured a dark liquid into each glass and offered one to Kelvrath. Whiskey, he explained. A human drink. Made from fermented grain. It helps with difficult conversations. Kelvrath accepted the glass. The liquid was sharp and bitter, but he drank it anyway. You said you never intended to use it, he said. But the system is automatic. What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if there's an accident? A malfunction? Webb's face grew even more haunted. That's the part that keeps me up at night. The system has been running for nearly 200 years. Automated, self-maintaining, hidden in places that no one can reach. We designed it to be unstoppable because we wanted our enemies to know that there was no way to disarm it. But that means we cannot disarm it either. He drained his glass and poured another. There's a team in human intelligence that monitors the system constantly. They watch the sensors. They track the threshold. They make sure nothing triggers it accidentally. But they don't actually control it. No one controls it. That was the point. The original architects are all dead. The exact specifications were destroyed after construction to prevent anyone from creating countermeasures. We know the system exists. We know it works. but we don't actually know how to turn it off. Kelvrath felt a new kind of horror settling into his mind. You built a weapon that could destroy everything, and then you forgot how to disable it. We didn't forget. We never knew in the first place. It was designed that way. The people who built it made sure that no one could ever stop it from working. Not us. Not anyone. Webb stared into his glass. Every day, humanity walks a tightrope over an abyss of our own creation. We smile and trade and negotiate because we genuinely want peace. We want to be the civilized species we've been pretending to be. But underneath all of it is the knowledge that if someone pushes us too hard, if someone kills too many of us, everything ends, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. Kelvrath sat in silence for a long time. The sun was setting over the plains of New Montana, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It was beautiful and peaceful, completely at odds with the terrible truths being discussed on this small porch. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally asked. "Why would you share such dangerous knowledge?" Webb smiled sadly. "Because you would have kept digging until you found it anyway. Because the truth is better than speculation. And because I'm old and tired and I don't want to carry this alone anymore." He looked at Kelvrath with something like hope in his eyes. "Also because I think you might understand. Your people are observers. You see things that others miss. You remember things that others forget. Maybe you can help us figure a way out of this trap we've built for ourselves." "Is there a way out?" "I don't know. I've spent 15 years trying to think of one. The system is too distributed, too redundant. You can't destroy it because the components are scattered across the galaxy in places no one can find. You can't hack it because it operates on quantum principles that change every time you observe them. You can't outlast it because it's powered by the energy of subspace itself." Webb finished his second drink. "But there has to be a way. There has to be. Because if there isn't, then humanity has doomed the entire galaxy. Not through malice, through fear. And that might be the saddest ending of all." Kelvrath left New Montana the next day. He carried Marcus Webb's words with him like a weight on his carapace. He now understood humanity better than almost any alien alive. They were not the peaceful species they pretended to be. They were survivors of a self-inflicted apocalypse, trying desperately to be better than their nature. They smiled and negotiated and made friends across the galaxy because they genuinely wanted to change. But they had built their redemption on a foundation of absolute destruction. And somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, ancient weapons waited patiently for the signal that might never come, or might come tomorrow, or might come in a million years. Kelvrath returned to his work as a diplomat, watching and documenting and trying to understand. But he never forgot what he had learned on that small porch on a distant world. The humans were trying to be good. He only hoped they would succeed, for everyone's sake. The warning came without notice, as the worst warnings always do. Kelvrath was in his office on Concord Station, reviewing diplomatic reports from the outer sectors, when every screen in the room went red. Emergency alerts scrolled across every display. Alarms began to sound throughout the station. Priority 1 alert. All senior diplomatic personnel report to emergency council chambers immediately. He had never seen a Priority 1 alert in his entire career. Most Veloxi never saw one in their lifetimes. It was the highest level of emergency the Galactic Concord could declare, reserved for threats to the existence of civilization itself. Kelvrath ran. The council chambers were already crowded when he arrived. Representatives from dozens of species were filing in, their faces showing various forms of fear and confusion. Kelvrath found a place near the back of the room and waited. The Concord Secretary General, a massive Krixtal named Vornax, stepped to the central podium. His usually composed face was twisted with barely controlled terror. 3 hours ago, he began, his voice rough. We received distress signals from the Outer Rim. Multiple colony worlds reported attacks from an unknown force. The attackers emerged from deep space, beyond the edge of the galaxy. Their ships are unlike anything in our records. Their weapons are beyond our technological understanding. He paused, gathering himself. We have identified the attackers as the Vone Collective. According to records from species we have only recently contacted, the Vone are a machine intelligence of immense age and power. They have consumed thousands of civilizations across multiple galaxies. They do not negotiate. They do not stop. They convert all biological life into resources for their expansion. Murmurs of fear rippled through the chamber. The Vone have entered our galaxy in force, their fleet numbers in the millions. Our combined military capabilities cannot stop them. The murmurs became shouts. Diplomats from various species demanded more information, proposed desperate strategies, or simply expressed their terror. Vornax waited for the noise to die down before continuing. That is not the worst news. The chamber fell silent. The Vone have identified humanity as a priority target. We do not know why. Perhaps their algorithms have flagged humans as a weak point. Perhaps they see something in human biology that they want. Whatever the reason, the Vone struck 3 human colony worlds simultaneously in their initial attack. Kelvrath felt his heart stop. Casualties are still being assessed. But preliminary reports indicate that the death toll exceeds 12 million human civilians. 12 million. Kelvrath thought of Marcus Webb's words on that porch on New Montana. A dead man's switch tied to human vital signs across the galaxy. If human casualties from hostile alien action exceed a threshold, the Galactic Concord is implementing emergency protocols. Vornax continued. All species are requested to mobilize whatever military forces they can spare. We must hold the line until that is no longer the primary concern. The new voice came from the side of the chamber. Everyone turned to look. Director Soma Vasquez stepped forward. She was flanked by 2 human military officers, their faces grim. Behind them, Kelvrath could see the 4 guards from Keth Prime. Commander Okonkwo, Sergeant Reyes, Torres, Yamamoto. All of them looked like they had not slept in days. Vasquez walked to the podium. She nodded to Vornax, who stepped aside without argument. The Secretary General of the Galactic Concord had just yielded the floor to a human, and no one objected, because everyone who knew the truth understood why. The Prometheus Protocol has been triggered, Vasquez said. The chamber erupted. Those who knew what the protocol was reacted with immediate panic. Those who did not know demanded explanations. Some species had never been told the secret. Now they would learn it under the worst possible circumstances. Vasquez waited for quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with exhaustion. For those who are unaware, I will explain briefly. 200 years ago, humanity created a fail-safe system designed to ensure our survival in a hostile galaxy. This system consists of weapons distributed throughout known space, connected to sensors, monitoring human vital signs. If human casualties from hostile alien action exceed a certain threshold, the system activates automatically. 12 million deaths exceeded that threshold. The countdown has begun. In approximately 72 hours, the Prometheus weapons will activate. Every inhabited world, every star system, everything will be destroyed. Complete silence. Even the species that had not known the truth seemed to understand instinctively that Vasquez was not exaggerating. We are working to stop it, she continued. Human scientists and engineers are attempting to access the system and disable it. But I must be honest with you. The protocol was designed to be unstoppable. That was the entire point. We wanted our enemies to know that there was no way to prevent the consequences of attacking us. We never anticipated facing an enemy that did not know about the protocol. An enemy from outside our galaxy, who had no way of understanding what they were triggering. She paused, her composure finally cracking. Humanity did not want this. We built the protocol out of fear, not malice. We were trying to protect ourselves. Instead, we may have doomed everyone. Kelvrath pushed through the crowd toward the front of the chamber. He did not know what he could do, but he knew he had to do something. He had spent years studying this situation. He knew more about the protocol than almost any non-human alive. Director Vasquez, he called out. What can we do to help? Vasquez looked at him. Recognition flickered in her eyes. Attaché Sorin, I remember you. You're the one who figured out the truth on your own. I am. And I have resources, contacts, knowledge. If there is anything the Veloxy can do to assist, we will do it. Vasquez nodded slowly. We need every mind we can get. The system is complex beyond anything our current scientists have ever seen. The original architects died generations ago. We are trying to reverse engineer a weapon designed to be impossible to reverse engineer. She gestured for Kelvrath to join her at the podium. This is not just a human problem anymore. This is everyone's problem. If you want to live, help us find a way to turn it off. The next 3 days were the longest of Kelvrath's life. He joined a desperate team of scientists, engineers, and intelligence operatives working in a secure facility beneath Concord Station. Humans and aliens worked side by side, sharing knowledge, proposing solutions, and failing again and again. The Prometheus system was a nightmare of complexity. It existed partially in normal space and partially in the quantum foam of subspace. Its components were scattered across millions of locations, hidden in places that no ship could reach. Even finding a single weapon was nearly impossible. Disabling all of them was a fantasy. The Vone continued their advance. More human colonies fell. More civilians died. With each report, the team worked faster, knowing that every death brought them closer to the point of no return. On the second day, Kelvrath traveled to Earth. He had never visited the human homeworld before. Under other circumstances, he would have been fascinated by this legendary death world, the place where humanity had evolved and nearly destroyed itself. But there was no time for tourism. He was part of a delegation begging humanity's government to find a solution. Earth's capital was a city called Geneva, rebuilt after the Great War on the site of an ancient diplomatic center. Kelvrath walked through streets filled with humans going about their daily lives. Most of them did not know what was happening. Their government had chosen not to cause panic. The delegation met with Earth's president in a secure bunker beneath the city. President Maria Santos was a woman in her 60s, her face lined with exhaustion. She had not slept since the crisis began. "We are doing everything we can," she told the delegation. "Our best minds are working on the problem. But I will not lie to you. The protocol was designed by geniuses who wanted to ensure it could never be stopped. They succeeded." A Thessian ambassador spoke up. "Surely there must be some way. Some override code. Some master switch." Santos shook her head. "The original architects deliberately destroyed that information. They wanted to ensure that no future government could threaten to disable the system to gain leverage. The protocol works because it is absolute, because everyone knows that once triggered, nothing can stop it, including us." Kelvrath stepped forward. "What about the threshold itself? Can it be adjusted?" "The threshold is not stored anywhere we can access. It's encoded in the quantum state of the sensor network. We can observe whether we've crossed it, but we cannot change it." A Scarith general spoke, his voice harsh. "Then humanity has killed us all. Your fear has destroyed the galaxy." Santos did not flinch. "You are correct, General. We built a weapon that we cannot control, and now it threatens everyone. We know this. We accept responsibility, but assigning blame will not save anyone. Only solutions will." She turned to address the entire delegation. "I am asking for your help, not as a human leader begging for mercy, as one intelligent being asking others to help solve an impossible problem. We have 72 hours. Let us use them wisely." The delegation returned to Concord Station. More species joined the effort. Krixtal weapons experts, Thessian quantum physicists, even Scarith military engineers, putting aside centuries of enmity to face a common threat. Kelvrath worked without rest, reviewing data, coordinating teams, and searching for any detail that might have been overlooked. His Veloxy memory allowed him to track hundreds of simultaneous conversations and experiments. He became a living database of everything the team had tried and failed. On the morning of the third day, with less than 12 hours remaining, a young human technician burst into the command center. "We found something." The team gathered around a holographic display. The technician, a woman named Dr. Lisa Park, explained what they had discovered. "The protocol has a physical core. We always assumed the entire system was distributed, with no central point of failure. But we were wrong. There is a nexus, a location where all the components converge. It exists in a pocket of folded space, outside normal time and reality." "Can we reach it?" Vasquez asked. "Theoretically, yes. We've identified the coordinates. But there's a problem." Park's face was pale. "The nexus exists between moments of time. It's not in any one place or any one moment. It's woven through the fabric of space-time itself." "What does that mean?" "It means that anyone who enters the nexus would be removed from normal reality. They wouldn't just die. They would cease to exist. Their atoms would be scattered across infinity. Their timeline would be erased. It would be as if they had never been born." The room fell silent. "But they could disable the system from inside?" Kelvrath asked. "We believe so. The architects built a failsafe within the nexus, a way to shut everything down if the worst happened. But reaching it requires a conscious mind to navigate the quantum maze. Someone has to go in, and they would be erased," Vasquez said quietly. "Completely. Not just from the present. From all of history. No one would remember them. No records would exist. It would be as if they had never lived. More silence. I'll go. The voice came from the back of the room. Commander Sarah Okonkwo stepped forward. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. Commander, Vasquez began, I'm the most qualified director. I have extensive training in quantum navigation from my time in special operations. I have no family, no children, no one who depends on me. She paused. I've spent my entire life protecting humanity. Let me do it one more time. You would be erased from existence, not just killed. Erased. Okonkwo smiled slightly. I know, but if I don't go, everyone dies anyway. At least this way, my sacrifice means something. No one argued. There was nothing to argue about. She was right. The next several hours were a blur of preparation. Scientists worked frantically to create a device that could transport Okonkwo into the Nexus. Engineers calibrated the coordinates. Medical teams monitored her vital signs. Kelvrath stayed close throughout the process. He did not know why. Perhaps because he had been part of this mystery since the beginning. Perhaps because he felt responsible for what was about to happen. Perhaps because someone should witness the courage of this human woman, who was about to sacrifice everything. As the final preparations were completed, Okonkwo found Kelvrath in the observation gallery. You're the Veloxi who figured out the truth, she said. The one who kept asking questions. I am. I am sorry that my questions led to this. She shook her head. You didn't create this situation. We did. 200 years ago, scared humans built a weapon because they couldn't imagine any other way to be safe. You just helped us understand what we had done. I wish I could do more. You can. Okonkwo met his eyes. You can remember. Your people are observers. Your memories are perfect. When I go into that nexus, I will be erased from history. No one will remember my name. No one will know what I did. But you're connected to the monitoring equipment in the command center. There's a small chance that the quantum shielding on those systems might preserve your memories through the event. You might be the only being in the galaxy who remembers that I existed. Kelvrath felt his heart constrict. I will remember, he promised. If it is possible, I will carry your story forever. She smiled. That's all I ask. An hour later, Kelvrath stood in the command center as the transport device was activated. Okonkwo stood in the center of a ring of machinery. Her body outlined in strange light that seemed to exist in multiple places at once. Beginning transport sequence, Dr. Park announced. Commander, you will have approximately 10 minutes subjective time to navigate the Nexus and reach the failsafe. The quantum maze will try to confuse you. Trust your instincts. Okonkwo nodded. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of everyone present. Tell the galaxy we're sorry, she said. Tell them we were afraid. Tell them we were human. And tell them we tried to be better. The light intensified. Her form began to blur and stretch. Transport in progress. Neural patterns maintaining coherence. She's inside. The minutes that followed were the longest Kelvrath had ever experienced. The monitoring equipment showed scrambled data, fragments of sensor readings from a place that should not exist. Occasionally, a word or phrase would emerge from the noise. Finding the pattern. So many choices. There it is. And then, with no warning, the readings flatlined. Every display in the room flickered. The countdown clock that had been measuring their remaining time reset to 0. The system is offline, Park announced, her voice shaking. The Prometheus weapons are deactivated. They're going dark across the galaxy. Cheers erupted. Delegates from every species embraced each other. Humans wept with relief, but Kelvrath stood still. Commander Okonkwo, he said quietly. What happened to her? Park checked her instruments. Her face fell. Who? The commander. The woman who went into the Nexus. Park looked confused. I don't. I'm sorry, Attaché Soren. What commander? The system shut down automatically. We don't know why. Kelvrath looked around the room. No one else seemed to remember. They were celebrating, but none of them knew why they had won. None of them remembered the woman who had saved them all, but Kelvrath remembered. The quantum shielding had worked. His perfect Veloxi memory had been preserved through the erasure. He was the only being in the galaxy who knew the truth. Sarah Okonkwo had given everything. Her life. Her history. Her very existence. And in return, the galaxy would never know her name. Kelvrath walked to the window and looked out at the stars. I will remember, he whispered. "I will tell your story." It was all he could do. It would have to be enough. The war against the Vone lasted for 30 years, without the threat of the Prometheus Protocol hanging over them. The species of the galaxy united in a way they never had before. Old enemies became allies. Ancient grudges were set aside. For the first time in galactic history, every intelligent species fought together against a common enemy. It was a brutal conflict. Entire worlds were lost. Trillions of beings died. The Vone were relentless, their machine intelligence adapting to every strategy, their factories producing new ships faster than the Allied forces could destroy them. But the galaxy held. They held because they had no other choice. They held because the alternative was extinction. And slowly, year by year, they pushed the Vone back. Humanity fought alongside their allies. Their soldiers served on the front lines. Their scientists developed new weapons. Their diplomats maintained the fragile coalition that held the alliance together. They bled and died like everyone else. And in doing so, they finally became true members of the galactic community. The final battle took place at the edge of the galaxy, near the rift from which the Vone had emerged. A combined fleet of more than 1,000,000 ships faced a Vone armada, 3 times their size. The battle lasted for 6 days. When it was over, the Vone were destroyed. Their central intelligence core shattered. Their invasion fleet reduced to drifting wreckage. The galaxy had survived. Kelvrath watched the celebrations from his office on Concord Station. He was old now. His carapace faded to pale gray. His movements slow and careful, but his mind was still sharp, and his memory was still perfect. He had spent 30 years carrying a secret that no one else could know. During the war, he had searched for ways to tell the truth. He had tried to write accounts of what had happened. He had attempted to create records of Commander Okonkwo's sacrifice, but something always stopped him. The words would not come. The files would corrupt. His attempts to speak about her were met with confusion, as if his listeners could not process what he was saying. The erasure was complete. The universe itself refused to acknowledge that Sarah Okonkwo had ever existed, but Kelvrath remembered. Every detail, every word she had spoken, every moment of her final hours. His quantum-shielded memory had preserved it all. A single bright thread of truth in a galaxy that had forgotten. He had almost given up hope of ever sharing the story. Then the war ended, and everything changed. 3 months after the final battle, a young Veloxy researcher came to see him. Her name was Telvara, and she was studying the events that had led to the Prometheus Protocol's deactivation. "The official records make no sense," she told Kelvrath. "The system was designed to be unstoppable. Every expert agrees that there was no way to disable it from outside, and yet it shut down on its own, minutes before it would have destroyed everything. What do the records say happened? Nothing. That's the problem. There's a gap. Everyone remembers celebrating when the countdown stopped, but no one remembers why it stopped. No one remembers who disabled it. It's as if that information was erased from existence." Kelvrath felt something shift inside him. A barrier that had held firm for 30 years suddenly seemed weaker. "What if I told you that I remember?" Telvara looked at him with surprise. "That's impossible. I've interviewed hundreds of witnesses. None of them remember anything. I was connected to monitoring equipment that had quantum shielding. The erasure did not affect my memories." He spoke carefully, testing each word. For the first time since that day in the command center, the words came easily. Perhaps enough time had passed. Perhaps the universe had finally loosened its grip on the secret. "There was a woman," Kelvrath said. "A human. Her name was Sarah Okonkwo." He told Telvara everything. The story poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. 30 years of silence ended in a single conversation that lasted for hours. When he finished, Telvara was silent for a long time. "If what you say is true," she finally said, "then this woman saved everyone. Every species, every world, every being in the galaxy. And no one knows. No one except me. We have to tell the truth. The galaxy deserves to know." Kelvrath nodded slowly. "That is what she asked of me. To remember. To tell her story. I have waited 30 years for the universe to let me speak." Over the following months, Kelvrath worked with Telvara to compile a complete account of what had happened. They gathered every fragment of evidence they could find. Sensor logs that showed unexplained anomalies, testimony from witnesses who remembered fragments without understanding what they meant, physical evidence from the command center where the transport had taken place. None of it proved anything directly. The erasure had been too thorough. But together, the pieces formed a picture that was impossible to ignore. Kelvrath wrote a book. He called it The Unknown Guardian, a true account of the Prometheus crisis. The book told the story of humanity's secret, the terrible weapon they had built out of fear, the crisis that had nearly destroyed everything, and the woman who had given up her existence to save them all. It became the most widely read document in galactic history. Species that had never trusted humanity read about the depth of human fear and the lengths they had gone to overcome it. They learned that the smiling diplomats and friendly merchants they had dealt with for centuries were survivors of an apocalypse, desperately trying to be better than their nature. They learned about Sarah Okonkwo, a woman who had stood in a room full of terrified beings and volunteered to be erased from existence, a woman who had walked into oblivion so that everyone else could live. They learned that humanity had been trying to be good, really trying, fighting against their own darkness every single day. And when the test finally came, a human had made the ultimate sacrifice without hesitation. The book changed everything. Anti-human sentiment, which had persisted in some quarters throughout the war, faded almost overnight. Species that had once whispered about human treachery now spoke with respect about human courage. The story of the unarmed guards took on new meaning. Everyone understood now that humans did not carry weapons not because they were weak, but because they were trying to prove they did not need them. The Galactic Concord built a monument. It stood in the central plaza of Concord Station, visible to every delegation that passed through, a simple pillar of white stone, inscribed with words in every language used by every member species. To the unknown guardian, we do not know your name. We cannot see your face, but we know what you did. You stood between us and oblivion, and you did not flinch. Whatever you were, wherever you came from, we thank you. The galaxy lives because of you. No one knew that the guardian's name was Sarah Okonkwo. The erasure still prevented direct knowledge of her identity, but Kelvrath's book had planted the seed of truth. Beings across the galaxy knew that someone had saved them. Someone human, someone brave, someone who had accepted a fate worse than death to protect strangers they would never meet. Kelvrath visited the monument often in his final years. He would stand before it for hours, remembering the woman who had asked him to carry her story. I told them, he would whisper. I told them everything I could. I hope it was enough. He died peacefully at the age of 432, ancient even by Veloxi standards. His memoirs were preserved in the Central Archives, a permanent record of everything he had witnessed throughout his long career. The chapter about Sarah Okonkwo was the most read section. Beings from every species studied his words, trying to understand the human who had saved them. They debated the nature of the erasure. They wondered if there was some way to restore her to existence. Philosophers wrote essays about what it meant to be remembered without being known. And in human diplomatic halls across the galaxy, the old tradition continued. Guards arrived unarmed. They stood behind their ambassadors with calm faces and watchful eyes. They carried no weapons and made no threats. They simply existed as a promise that humanity was still trying. New diplomats from other species often asked about this custom. Why did the humans send unprotected guards? Were they not concerned about safety? The answers varied depending on who was asked. Some spoke of the old truth, the terrible weapon that had once held the galaxy hostage. Others spoke of the new truth, the sacrifice that had ended that threat forever. But all of them understood that the unarmed guards represented something important. They represented choice. Humanity had built the worst weapon in galactic history because they were afraid. They had lived for 2 centuries under the shadow of their own terror, smiling and hoping that the darkness would never escape. And when the darkness finally threatened to consume everything, a single human had walked into the void to turn it off. The unarmed guards were humanity's way of saying that they chose to trust. They chose to believe that the galaxy would not harm them. They chose to be vulnerable because vulnerability was necessary for true peace. It was a risky choice. It was a brave choice. And every day that passed without incident proved that the choice was being honored. Generations passed. The Prometheus crisis became ancient history. The Von War became legend. But the monument still stood, and the guards still arrived unarmed, and the galaxy still remembered. There was a young alien ambassador, fresh from her training, preparing for her first diplomatic mission. She was a melodai, a species known for their love of music and their peaceful nature. She had studied human customs extensively, But one thing still puzzled her. Why do the human guards carry no weapons? She asked her aide, a Veloxi named Kethral who had served in the diplomatic corps for decades. Kethral looked at her with ancient eyes that held knowledge passed down through generations. Because they don't need them, he said. And because they're asking us to believe they never will. The ambassador considered this answer. That seems like a lot of trust to place in others. It is. But humans have learned that trust is the only foundation for lasting peace. They spent centuries preparing for war. They built weapons beyond imagination. And in the end, none of it made them safe. Only trust could do that. He gestured toward the monument visible through the window of their ship. Someone taught them that lesson. Someone who gave everything so that humanity could learn to believe in something better than fear. We don't know their name, but we know what they did. And we honor their sacrifice by trying to be worthy of it. The ambassador looked at the monument for a long time. Then she turned to face her aide. I think I understand, she said. The humans arrive unarmed because weapons are not the answer. Violence is not the answer. The only thing that can truly protect anyone is the choice to be better. Yes, that is what they learned. That is what they try to embody every day. They are not perfect. No species is. But they are trying. And the fact that they keep trying, day after day, century after century, is perhaps the most hopeful thing in the galaxy. The ship approached Concord Station. Through the windows, the ambassador could see dozens of other vessels from dozens of other species. The great diplomatic hub floated in space, a testament to what intelligent beings could accomplish when they chose cooperation over conflict. And somewhere in the station, she knew, human guards were taking their positions, unarmed, unarmored, trusting that the galaxy they had once threatened to destroy would choose peace instead of war. The ambassador made a decision. When she arrived at the station, she would go to the monument. She would pay her respects to the unknown guardian. And she would carry that memory with her throughout her career, because that was what it meant to be part of the galactic community, remembering those who sacrificed, honoring those who chose to be better, and believing, despite everything, that the future could be bright. The ship docked, and the ambassador stepped onto Concord Station for the first time. Her aide walked beside her, pointing out the various delegations as they passed. There, he said, gesturing toward a group near the central atrium. The human ambassador and her guards. The ambassador looked. A middle-aged woman stood at the center of the group, speaking animatedly with representatives from 3 other species. She seemed warm and genuine, her smile lighting up her face as she laughed at something one of her companions said. Behind her, 2 guards stood at attention. A tall man with kind eyes, a shorter woman with close-cropped hair. They wore simple dress uniforms and carried no weapons. They watched the crowd with calm alertness, ready to protect their charge if necessary. Ready, but not expecting to need to. Because they trusted. The ambassador watched them for a long moment. Then she walked toward the monument to pay her respects, carrying with her the weight of history and the hope of the future. The unknown guardian had asked only to be remembered, and the galaxy had not forgotten. In halls across 1,000 worlds, human diplomats continued their work. They negotiated treaties. They resolved disputes. They built bridges between species that had once been enemies, and their guards stood behind them, unarmed and unafraid, because that was the lesson humanity had learned. That was the legacy of one woman's sacrifice. That was the hope that could light a galaxy. In the end, weapons were not the answer. Trust was the answer. And every day, in small ways and large, the beings of the galaxy proved that Sarah Okonkwo's sacrifice had been worth it. The darkness had been turned back. The future was bright. And somewhere, beyond the bounds of space and time, perhaps a woman who no longer existed smiled, knowing that her choice had made all the difference. The story was over, but the hope continued, forever.